Have you ever driven past a car dealership and seen rows and rows of brand new cars just sitting there? It makes you wonder, what happens to the ones that never get sold? Do they get shipped back to the factory? Do they get crushed into scrap metal? Or do they just sit there forever? Here's the real kicker. In today's market, more cars are idling at dealership lots than ever before. High prices, rising interest rates, and changing consumer demand are killing sales. And now, thousands of unsold cars are piling up with nowhere to go. Some dealerships are slashing prices. Others are shipping cars to secret storage lots. But some, they meet a fate you won't believe. So what really happens to brand new cars that never find a buyer? Let's break it all down. What's happening? The sight of dealership lots packed with brand new cars may look like a sign of prosperity, but it is actually the opposite. Across the United States, thousands of vehicles are sitting unsold, and the situation is growing worse by the day. While new car inventory shortages were a major issue in previous years due to supply chain disruptions, the problem has now flipped. Dealerships are drowning in vehicles they cannot sell fast enough, and the consequences could be disastrous for the auto industry. The biggest culprit behind this growing surplus is price. Over the past few years, the cost of a new vehicle has skyrocketed, putting many models out of reach for the average buyer. In just a few years, the average price of a new car has surged well beyond $45,000, making even standard vehicles feel like luxury purchases. Higher price tags mean larger monthly payments, which have become even more unaffordable due to rising interest rates. Interest rates are another major factor keeping buyers away. Financing a car now costs significantly more than it did just a few years ago. For many consumers, the difference in monthly payments is enough to make them hold off on buying a new vehicle altogether. With inflation squeezing household budgets, fewer people are willing to commit to an expensive car loan, leading to more vehicles sitting idle on dealership lots. Changing consumer preferences are also playing a major role in this inventory crisis. The automotive industry is experiencing a major shift, with a growing focus on electric vehicles. However, the transition has been anything but smooth. While manufacturers are pushing EVs aggressively, many consumers are still hesitant to make the switch due to concerns about charging infrastructure, battery range, and long-term reliability. At the same time, traditional gas-powered vehicles are losing favor in some markets, leading to confusion about what buyers actually want. Despite these warning signs, automakers continue to produce vehicles at a relentless pace. Manufacturing plants operate on production schedules, set months or even years in advance, and scaling down output is not as simple as flipping a switch. This means that even when demand slows, new cars keep rolling off the assembly line. The result? An ever-growing backlog of unsold inventory that dealerships are struggling to manage. But why do dealerships continue to take in cars they know they might not sell? The answer lies in how the dealership business model works, a system that forces dealers to take financial risks with every vehicle on their lot. Understanding why dealerships cannot simply return unsold vehicles to the manufacturer reveals why this problem is even harder to fix. How dealerships work. One of the biggest misconceptions about car dealerships is that they own the vehicles on their lot. In reality, dealerships do not buy cars outright with cash. Instead, they use a financing system known as floor planning. This means they take out loans to stock their inventory, paying interest on every vehicle that remains unsold. Every unsold car is not just a missed sale, it is an ongoing financial burden. Dealerships are charged interest on their floor plan loans, meaning the longer a car sits unsold, the more money the dealer loses. Additionally, there are costs for insurance, storage, and maintenance. A vehicle that stays on the lot for too long is not just an idle asset. It actively drains a dealership's resources. Unlike other industries, where unsold products can often be returned to the manufacturer or liquidated easily, car dealerships do not have this option. Once a vehicle is delivered, it belongs to the dealer, and the manufacturer is not responsible for taking it back. This puts dealerships in a difficult position. If they miscalculate demand, they are stuck with excess inventory that is expensive to hold on to. To make matters worse, automakers have immense control over how many vehicles dealers receive. Even if a dealership knows a particular model is not selling well, they often have little choice but to accept more shipments. Manufacturers have set allocation systems that determine how many cars a dealership gets based on their past sales. If a dealer refuses to take new inventory, they risk receiving fewer popular models in the future. This system forces dealerships to keep taking in new cars, even when they are struggling to sell what they already have. As a result, dealers are left with a growing number of unsold cars they cannot return and can barely afford to keep. This flawed system makes it incredibly difficult to adjust to changing market conditions. The industry is essentially stuck in a cycle where production continues at full speed. Dealerships keep receiving shipments, and cars continue to pile up. So how long can a car sit unsold before it becomes a real problem? The answer is not as long as you might think. How long can cars sit before they become a problem? The moment a new car arrives at a dealership, the clock starts ticking. The longer it sits, the more expensive it becomes for the dealer to keep it. In the auto industry, there is a general rule of thumb known as the 90-day rule. If a car remains unsold for more than 3 months, dealers start to worry. After 90 days, the financial burden of carrying unsold inventory begins to take a serious toll. Interest payments on floor plan loans continue to accumulate, storage space becomes an issue, and insurance costs add up. Dealers also have to maintain these vehicles, keeping them clean, charged in the case of EVs, and ready to be sold at a moment's notice. If a car remains unsold for too long, dealers are forced to take action. Some start offering discounts, while others look for alternative ways to move the inventory, such as leasing the vehicles as loaner cars or sending them to auction. If none of these strategies work, the dealership may end up selling the car at a significant loss just to free up space for newer models. The longer a car sits unsold, the harder it becomes to move. Shoppers are less likely to buy an old new car, especially if a newer model year has already been released. Eventually, dealers are left with few options: either accept heavy losses or keep waiting, hoping for demand to pick up. Now that we understand the problem, the next question is, how do dealerships deal with these unsold vehicles? The answer is more complicated than you might think. The price drop strategy. Slashing prices to lure buyers. When dealerships find themselves overwhelmed with unsold inventory, their first move is almost always to lower prices. In the world of car sales, discounts and incentives are the go-to weapons to lure hesitant buyers back into the showroom. Manufacturers often step in to help dealers with cashback offers, special lease deals, and 0% financing incentives. These promotions make cars more attractive by reducing either the upfront cost or the long-term financial burden. For example, a sedan that is struggling to sell might suddenly come with a $3,000 cashback offer or a 0% interest rate for 60 months. These deals effectively lower the monthly payment for the buyer, making the vehicle more affordable. In some cases, manufacturers take even more drastic action by offering employee pricing or massive rebates to get cars off the lot. This happens most often when a new model year is about to be released. Automakers do not want last year's models still sitting on dealership lots when the latest versions arrive, so they introduce deep discounts to clear out old inventory. However, even price cuts are not always enough. Some vehicles still struggle to attract buyers, no matter how much the price is reduced. This can happen for several reasons. Sometimes the car simply does not match consumer preferences. Other times, negative press or poor reliability ratings scare away buyers. And in some cases, the market is just oversaturated. If too many dealerships are trying to sell the same vehicle at a discount, the price drop strategy loses its effectiveness. When slashing prices fails, dealerships have to look for other ways to rebrand and reposition these cars in the eyes of potential buyers. One of the most effective ways to do this is by turning them into used cars, a tactic that might surprise many shoppers. If a new car isn't selling at a discount, dealerships have another trick up their sleeve. They can turn it into a used car without it ever leaving the lot, turning brand new cars into used cars. Most car buyers assume that a used car means it has had a previous owner. But in the dealership world, a car can be labeled as used without ever being registered or driven for more than a few miles. This is thanks to a common rebranding tactic that allows dealerships to convert unsold new vehicles into certified pre-owned cars. Here is how it works. If a vehicle is sitting on the lot for too long, the dealership may decide to use it as a loaner vehicle or a demo car. These cars are typically driven by service customers, dealership employees, or test driving shoppers for a short period. After a few months of use, the car is no longer considered brand new and can officially be relisted as a used vehicle, even if it only has a few hundred miles on it. The advantage of this strategy is that it allows dealerships to reset the vehicle's depreciation curve. New cars lose value the moment they are driven off the lot, but a certified pre-owned vehicle is viewed differently. Buyers perceive CPO cars as a better deal because they come with lower prices, extended warranties, and dealership-backed guarantees. For the dealership, the benefits are clear. Instead of offering a massive discount on a new car, they can sell it as a certified pre-owned model at a slightly lower price without taking a major loss. This tactic works well for some vehicles, but it is not a universal solution. If a car is deeply unpopular, rebranding it as a used car does not necessarily make it more appealing. At that point, dealerships have to find a different way to move inventory, sometimes by physically relocating cars to different markets. When dealerships cannot sell a car locally or through a trade, the last resort is wholesale auctions, where vehicles are sold at steep discounts to the highest bidder, the auction escape. When all else fails, dealerships send unsold cars to auction. Wholesale car auctions serve as a clearinghouse for unwanted inventory, allowing dealers to offload slow-selling vehicles in bulk. At these auctions, used car dealers, rental car companies, and international buyers bid on vehicles, often at deep discounts. Some cars are resold on used car lots, while others are shipped overseas to markets where demand is higher. For dealerships, auctions are a last resort because they almost always result in financial losses. A car that originally had a $45,000 price tag might sell for just $30,000 at auction, forcing the dealership to take a major hit. However, keeping an unsold car on the lot for months or years is even worse, so sometimes taking a loss is the only viable option. Rental car companies are among the biggest buyers at these auctions. If you have ever rented a car, there is a good chance it originally sat unsold at a dealership before being sent to auction. International buyers also play a key role, especially in regions where certain American models are highly desirable. Some automakers even run their own closed-door auctions, where only franchise dealerships of the same brand can participate. This helps protect resale values and ensures that unwanted inventory stays within the manufacturer's dealer network. But even auctions have their limitations. If demand is low across the board, even wholesale buyers might not be interested in certain models. In those rare cases, some vehicles are stored indefinitely, or even scrapped for parts, a shocking fate for cars that were once brand new. These strategies help dealerships survive short-term inventory crises, but they do not solve the deeper problems facing the auto industry. While some cars wait in storage, others are sent overseas, where they might find a second chance in a completely different market, exporting to other countries. Just because a particular car model struggles to sell in the United States does not mean it lacks value elsewhere. One of the most common solutions for dealing with excess inventory is exporting vehicles to international markets, where demand might still be strong. Automakers have long used this strategy to balance regional supply and demand, ensuring that slow-selling models in one country can still be profitable elsewhere. Latin America, Africa, and parts of Asia are some of the biggest recipients of exported vehicles. In these regions, certain models that fail in the United States can actually perform well due to different consumer preferences, road conditions, and economic factors. For example, sedans, which have been rapidly declining in popularity in the United States, still have strong demand in South America and parts of Africa. Similarly, manual transmission vehicles, which are rare in North America, remain popular in countries where automatic cars are considered a luxury. Some automakers specifically design models for export markets, knowing that demand in their home country might not be strong enough to justify large-scale sales. These global models are built with the intent of being adaptable to different regions, often featuring modifications to meet local safety regulations, emission standards, and fuel efficiency requirements. Exporting vehicles is not always a simple process. Shipping costs, import duties, and local regulations can make it difficult for automakers to move cars from one market to another. Additionally, some countries impose restrictions on foreign imports to protect their domestic auto industries, making it more challenging for manufacturers to find buyers for their unsold inventory. Despite these challenges, exporting remains one of the most viable options for dealing with surplus vehicles. It allows automakers to clear out inventory without resorting to deep discounts that could hurt brand value. However, when even exports are not enough to absorb excess supply, manufacturers sometimes turn to a more drastic measure: destruction. In extreme cases, some cars are never sold at all. Instead, they are deliberately destroyed, often for reasons that go beyond simple economics. The destruction option. It might sound unthinkable, but in some cases, automakers choose to destroy brand new, unsold cars rather than sell them at a discount. This practice is especially common among luxury brands, which go to great lengths to protect their brand image and resale values. Luxury car manufacturers, such as Ferrari, Porsche, and Bentley, operate on a business model that relies heavily on exclusivity. If too many vehicles flood the market at discounted prices, it can devalue the brand and hurt the resale value of existing models. To prevent this from happening, some high-end automakers prefer to scrap surplus cars rather than sell them at a loss. The logic is simple. A brand new luxury car sitting in storage for too long risks becoming old stock, which dealers might be forced to sell at a discount. If this happens, it can create a ripple effect, lowering the perceived value of the entire brand. Rather than risk damaging their carefully curated image, some manufacturers opt to write off these vehicles and have them destroyed instead. Even mainstream automakers have been known to scrap unsold vehicles under certain circumstances. In some cases, cars that have been sitting in storage for too long may develop issues that make them unfit for sale. If a vehicle's warranty clock starts ticking while it is in storage, the manufacturer might decide it is not worth selling at all, opting to salvage usable parts before sending the rest to the crusher. This practice is controversial, as it results in enormous waste, both financially and environmentally. Many critics argue that automakers should focus more on adjusting production levels rather than resorting to destruction as a last resort. However, the reality is that for some companies, the cost of scrapping a vehicle is still lower than the cost of allowing the market to be flooded with excessive supply. This is not the first time the auto industry has faced an inventory crisis. Looking at past situations can provide insight into how automakers might navigate the current mess. The 2008 financial crisis. The current inventory crisis is not the first time the auto industry has faced a massive surplus of unsold vehicles. In fact, the last major economic downturn, the 2008 financial crisis, left automakers in a situation so dire that some had to take extreme measures to deal with their excess inventory. During the recession, demand for new cars collapsed almost overnight. Millions of people lost their jobs, credit tightened, and consumers who might have otherwise bought a new vehicle either held onto their old cars or turned to the used market for cheaper alternatives. Auto sales plummeted, and suddenly, manufacturers had far more cars than buyers. This glut of unsold inventory forced automakers to drastically cut production. Plants were temporarily shut down, shifts were reduced, and in some cases, entire manufacturing lines were halted. But even these production cuts were not enough to offset the number of cars already sitting at dealerships. Manufacturers and dealers alike were in trouble, with thousands of vehicles sitting unsold for months. With no buyers and limited options, some automakers made a shocking decision. They resorted to destroying brand new vehicles. Rather than letting cars sit indefinitely or selling them at rock-bottom prices that could hurt the brand's value, manufacturers scrapped thousands of unsold cars. At the same time, rental car companies saw an opportunity. Companies like Hertz and Enterprise swooped in to buy up excess inventory at steep discounts. These bulk purchases gave automakers a way to clear out vehicles while keeping them on the road. However, this influx of vehicles into the rental fleet had a long-term effect on the used car market. After just a few years, these rental cars re-entered the market as used vehicles, significantly lowering the resale value of certain models. Cars that had been overproduced during the crisis saw their prices drop sharply in the used car market, making it even harder for dealerships to sell new versions at full price. The 2008 crisis was a wake-up call for the auto industry, proving that overproduction could lead to disaster. However, history is repeating itself. Today's unsold inventory crisis is exposing the same weaknesses in the industry's outdated production model. But what happens when an entire car brand disappears? The collapse of Pontiac and Saturn offers another lesson in what happens when dealerships are left with vehicles no one wants. The Pontiac and Saturn collapse. One of the most infamous examples of unsold inventory chaos occurred when General Motors shut down Pontiac and Saturn as part of its restructuring plan following the 2008 financial crisis. These brands, once household names, were suddenly discontinued. leaving dealerships with thousands of unsold vehicles that no longer had a future. For dealerships, this was a nightmare scenario. Every Pontiac and Saturn on the lot instantly lost value because consumers were hesitant to buy cars from a brand that no longer existed. The fear was simple. If the brand was dead, would service, repairs, and resale value also disappear? To move these vehicles, General Motors slashed prices and offered deep incentives to entice buyers. Some dealerships advertised discounts of up to 50% just to get rid of the excess inventory. However, even with steep price cuts, many of these cars sat unsold for months. Eventually, many of these vehicles were sent to auction, where they were sold to independent used car dealers at heavy losses. Over the next few years, the used car market saw a flood of Pontiacs and Saturns being sold at deeply discounted prices. Consumers who were willing to take the risk on a discontinued brand could get a nearly new vehicle for a fraction of the original cost. However, for General Motors, this situation highlighted the dangers of overproduction and poor brand management. By the time they decided to shut down these brands, too many cars had already been made, and dealerships were left to deal with the fallout. Even today, automakers face a similar risk. If a particular model struggles to sell, it could end up in the same situation as Pontiac and Saturn, lingering on dealership lots, losing value, and eventually being offloaded at deep discounts. While legacy automakers struggle with dealership inventory, one company has found a way to avoid this problem entirely: Tesla's direct sales model. Unlike traditional automakers, Tesla does not use a dealership model. Instead, it sells directly to customers, bypassing the middleman entirely. This means that Tesla never has to worry about unsold inventory piling up at independent dealerships. This direct-to-consumer approach gives Tesla greater control over production and inventory management. If demand slows down, Tesla can adjust production more quickly than traditional automakers, who rely on complex dealership networks. Tesla also avoids the pricing chaos that plagues other brands. Since dealerships set their own prices based on supply and demand, a Toyota Corolla might cost significantly more at one dealership than another. Tesla, on the other hand, sets a fixed price for all its vehicles, eliminating haggling and price fluctuations between locations. Other automakers are taking notice. Ford and General Motors have started experimenting with direct-to-consumer sales, hoping to cut out dealerships and move toward an online purchasing model. However, there is a major roadblock standing in their way: franchise laws. Tesla has managed to bypass some of these restrictions by using showrooms instead of dealerships. But for traditional automakers, transitioning to a direct sales model would require massive legal battles and changes to existing laws. So, can the auto industry fix the inventory problem? The answer is complicated, but one thing is clear: the system needs to change. The final verdict: the issue of unsold cars has been a problem for decades, and there is no simple solution. The dealership model, production cycles, and forecasting methods used by automakers are all deeply flawed, leading to overproduction and inventory gluts that hurt both dealers and manufacturers. One possible solution is better demand forecasting. Automakers must improve how they predict sales trends, using real-time data and more flexible production schedules to avoid the extreme overproduction seen today. However, this is easier said than done. Car production involves long-term planning, making it difficult to make rapid adjustments. Another potential fix is the expansion of direct-to-consumer sales. If more automakers could bypass dealerships and sell directly to customers, they could prevent inventory from piling up at third-party lots. However, as mentioned earlier, franchise laws make this a difficult path for legacy automakers. The industry could also explore subscription-based ownership models, where consumers pay a monthly fee to access a rotating selection of vehicles. This would create a more predictable revenue stream for automakers while keeping inventory moving. So now you know, the fate of brand new cars that never get sold isn't as simple as you might think. Some get massive discounts, others get repurposed, and a few, they meet a fate you'd never expect. But what do you think? Have you ever seen a crazy deal on a car that sat too long at a dealership? Or do you think automakers need a better system to manage inventory? Let's talk about it in the comments.